The trig identities that you guys know right now are the reciprocal ones. So you know that tangent, okay, so you know that when you're looking at the trig on a unit circle, okay, what you know is you know that the cosine corresponds to the x value, the sine corresponds to the y value of the right triangles formed, okay, and then you know that the tangent is set up as the ratio of sine over cosine. Right, so this is the first trig identity. Right? You know that the cosine and sine correspond, but this is the first identity. All the reciprocal ratios are also trig identities. We'll talk more about those later, but secant is 1 over cosine, cosecant is 1 over sine, cotangent isn't just 1 over tangent, but it's cosine over sine. Again, you can think of them in those forms. Okay? But if you took this right triangle right here, you can derive the Pythagorean identity. Because if we look at this right triangle, we have legs squared, x squared, plus y squared equals 1 squared. And if we replace those with their corresponding trig values, notice how this designates the cosine squared. Okay, it puts it in it puts it in the above and right between the cosine and the angle measure. Okay, so this is cosine squared plus sine squared theta is equal to 1. So because we can create this identity from this right triangle, okay, this is the Pythagorean identity. And when you guys start working with, and again, it all depends how much time we have at the end of the school year, or at the end of this year. If we have time to introduce more of these trig identities, we will, just because this is a place that many students struggle a little bit in pre-cal. And in fact, in my summer class, this was probably for those people who didn't pass the level that they needed to be to get credit and placement credit for the summer class. Most of it was because they couldn't quite grasp what trig identities were. And it's hard, I think, if you're trying to do it on your own, but that's why I want to make sure I introduce it this year so that next year when it's taught to you in your pre-cal class, you have a little bit of background working with it, where they come from. And so I will spend some time talking about why they are what they are and where they came from, so that even if you forget to, or if you don't memorize them, you might be able to recreate them. Okay, but this is the Pythagorean identity. Okay, but there's not just one form of this. Okay, there's multiple forms because you can isolate any one of these terms. So if we were isolating the cosine squared theta, what we would do is we'd subtract sine squared theta from both sides. So this is an alternate form or version of that trig identity. We could have also isolated the sine squared theta. And if that was the case, we'd take this original form and we'd subtract cosine squared from both sides. And that would be our other form. So there are 3 different forms of this Pythagorean identity. And what you're going to be asked to do on the question that you get is to identify which of the possible statements are versions of this. Okay? So if you're given a question like this, choose all of these that are Pythagorean identity. And so you take the basic one, the main one, cosine plus sine equals, cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. And then when you solve each of these individually, sine squared is 1 minus cosine squared, so that works. It's not 1 plus, so I eliminate or keep that one out, but cosine squared is 1 minus sine squared. So those 3 would work, the other one would not.